Bienvenidos. This is a podcast that explores Latinx media and culture in its many forms. I am Dr. Rojo Robles.
And I am Dr. Rebecca L. Salois. And we are Latinx and Latin American Studies professors at Baruch College in New York City. In this podcast, we will analyze Latinx film, television, literature, art, and cultures.
We will consider how these works are perceived, analyze them, and investigate the real-world reflections and implication of that work on Latinx cultures in the U.S. and beyond.
Welcome to Latinx Visions.
Bienvenidas, bienvenidos, bienvenides.
Welcome back, everyone.
Today, we're bringing you a conversation with Julio Anta and Jacoby Salcedo, the duo behind the fantastic graphic novel Frontera. This interview took place on October 15, 2025, via Zoom.
When we decided that our theme for season 9 was going to be borders, I just knew we had to discuss Frontera. I really wanted to. I had taught the novel in my Latinx literature in the U.S. class back in 2023, and the students really, really enjoyed it. I hoped that we could make this a conversation with the authors of the book, and so I was thrilled we were able to make it happen.
So before we begin the interview, we will share a bit of background on both Anta and Salcedo, as well as about the graphic novel we are focusing on today.
After the conversation with the author and artist, we'll share our thoughts on that conversation, the book as a whole, and our season's broader focus on border stories.
So let's start with Julio Anta. Writer Julio Anta was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and he currently lives right here in New York City. He was raised in a Cuban and Colombian family and was an avid comic book reader when he was a child. His books tell diverse stories about Latina characters for readers of all ages, and his writing focuses on the intersection of Latina identity and U.S. American life. In addition to Frontera, the 2023 Eisner Award-nominated graphic novel published by Harper Alley that we will be discussing today, Anta is the writer of numerous graphic novels, including Home, which debuted in 2021 and was published through Image Comics, Si Se Puede, The Latino Heroes Who Changed the United States, published in 2023 by 10 Speed Graphic, This Land is Our Land, a Blue Beetle story, published in 2024 by DC Comics, and Speak Up Santiago, published in 2025 by Random House.
Now, Jacoby Salcedo, the illustrator for the book we're talking about today, is a Mexican-American illustrator and comic artist who's based in Washington State. His work is recognizable for its expressive characters, and he's known for blending classic comic influences with a modern sensibility. His visual storytelling brings emotional depth to every page. Salcedo has contributed to a number of comic anthologies and indie publications, including DC's Legion of Bloom, Graphic Mundi's COVID Chronicles, and the GLAAD award-winning Young Men in Love. He was the artist on the Dark Horse miniseries It's Only Teenage Wasteland and the co-creator of We Are Scarlet Twilight. He and Anta have been frequent collaborators, working together on Balseros, This Land is Our Land, and of course, our book for today, Frontera. The two have multiple projects in the works, and they'll talk about it a little bit in our interview.
So before we get to that interview, though, let's talk a little bit about the book. Frontera is a young adult graphic novel and was published in 2023, and it tells the story of Mateo. He is a teenage boy who is trying to cross the border into the United States. As he attempts to cross the border between the U.S. and Mexico, Mateo faces similar issues to real-life migrants in the Sonoran Desert: border patrol, heat and dehydration, wildlife, vigilantes, and more. But Frontera offers a side of the supernatural, as well as Mateo encounters Guillermo, the ghost of a young man who died crossing the desert several decades earlier.
As the back of the book tells us, as long as he remembers to stay smart and keep his eyes open, Mateo knows that he can survive the trek across the Sonoran Desert that will take him from Mexico to the United States. Side note, he doesn't stay smart, but we'll get to that. That is until he's caught by the Border Patrol only moments after sneaking across the fence in the dead of night. Escaping their clutches comes at a price, and lost in the desert without a guide or water, Mateo is ill prepared for the unforgiving heat that is sure to arrive come sunrise. With the odds stacked against him, his one chance at survival may be putting his trust in something, or rather someone, that he isn't even sure exists. If you'd asked him if ghosts were real before he found himself face to face with one, Mateo wouldn't have even considered it. But now, confronted with the nearly undeniable presence of Guillermo, he's having second thoughts. Having spent his afterlife guiding migrants to safety, Guillermo knows things about the Sonoran Desert far beyond what could be explained by a mere hallucination. But even as Mateo forms an uneasy partnership with Guillermo, survival is still uncertain. The Sonoran Desert, with its hostile temperatures and inhabitants, is teeming with danger as the Border Patrol and rogue militias prowl its deadly terrain. As his journey stretches on, Mateo will have to decide exactly what and who he's willing to sacrifice to find home. All right. So, welcome, Julio and Jacoby. I'm so happy to have you with us here.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. My name is Julio Anta. I am the writer of Frontera.
Jacoby Salcedo, and I'm the artist for Frontera as well.
So, we wanted to just dive into our interview questions today, and we're going to start with this first one. You know, we all know that representation matters. It might sound kind of cliche, but it's still very true, right? People like, oh, everyone says representation matters, but the reason we say it is because it does. Can you both maybe talk a little bit about why Latinx representation matters to you and how graphic narratives can play a unique role in broadening that representation?
Yeah, well, for me, my background is that I grew up in Miami. My dad's Cuban, my mom's Colombian. And Miami, for those of you who haven't been there, is a place that's about 70% Latino. It was also like that in the 90s when I was growing up. Every single teacher pretty much that I had in school had some sort of origin in Latin America. Either they were born there or their parents were. Spanish was my first language. It's the language that, you walk around Miami today and back then, and you're greeted in Spanish normally. So, it's this place that has this huge Latino culture. But despite that, I didn't grow up learning anything about, Latinos in history. I didn't see any representation in media with the exception of like the telenovelas that my grandmother watched. And even then you can argue that those are, extremely whitewashed. But yeah, so for me, when I started doing the work that I do, it was really important for me to tell stories from a Latino perspective and starring people that look like me and my family, my friends. So, Frontera is part of that. And I also think that with graphic novels, it eliminates doubt for a lot of culturally specific things, right? So, when it comes to characters, right? Sometimes in a novel, and I see this a lot in middle grade and YA graphic prose novels, you have a lot of kind of cringy ways of trying to describe the color of someone's skin. And, in a graphic novel, we can just design the characters and show them on the page the way that they are. When our main character, Mateo, crosses the Sonoran Desert, there is no reader is going to see that and think it's something like the Sahara Desert, right? If they read it in prose. We can show exactly what the Sonoran Desert looks like, what makes it unique, what makes it challenging, and it's just all right there on the page. So for me, that's what is so special about graphic novels, especially when it comes to, representation and culturally specific stories like Frontera and the other books that we work on together.
Yeah, and kind of almost in the opposite upbringing of Julio, where I was born in Washington State, or I wasn't born in Washington. I lived in Washington State, where it is pretty much a bunch of white people and just a lot of. So I didn't see like much, really any Latinos or anything out there. So, and my dad's immigrant from Mexico, so being able to tell these stories is like being able to, show love to a side of me that I wasn't really raised with and being able to like showcase that culture. But yeah, I think like with graphic novels, Julio kind of explained it. It's like there's no doubt of what is being shown, you know? And it is so nice to showcase that too visually because like we don't need words to describe, you know, what exactly a character could be like feeling, and like I think it makes it easier for the readers to just visually look at a character's face and like see how they're feeling, and also just like throw their own input into kind of understanding what they could be feeling. You know, there's also a little bit of just like reader interpretation, I think, and I think that's also could create something more powerful than we intended.
Yeah, yeah. And also something, because your books are all in color, that's a lot easier to do than say something like a manga or like a weekly cartoon in the newspaper or something like that. So, many graphic novels indicate the writer and the artist, and you both introduce yourselves as playing one of those roles for Frontera. But the cover of Frontera simply states that it is by both of you. I was wondering if you could speak to your overall collaboration process, including Frontera, but also on This Land Is Our Land, the Blue Beetle story that you had come out in 2024. I know you've worked on shorter comics together as well, but also maybe a little bit about the process part of your upcoming books, Paco and Tiny, which is a middle grade title, and Prison Kids, which is a YA title.
Yeah, so Jacoby and I have been working together at this point for 6 years, I think.
6 years. Yep.
A little background. When I started trying to make comics, I started with mini comics. So I was making these like 4 to 10 page short stories, and Jacoby is one of the first artists that I messaged online. I saw his art, I loved it, and I sent him an email just telling him like, "Hey, I have this." I think it was 7 pages. That story, it was called "The Price of Freedom," and it was a story about this father who imagines what it would be like if his I guess I kind of spoiled the twist at the end. But the setup is that it's this father who gets revenge on the police officer who killed his son. And then, by the end of it, the twist is that it didn't actually happen. He was just watching, yet another news story of a cop who killed a kid and imagining, he was seeing his son in the eyes of that kid. So that was the first story that we worked on. And, that was very much like writer dictating what the artist should do, because it was something that I wrote before we knew each other, before we'd ever collaborated, and I just wrote a script and he drew it. But then from that moment on, we both felt like we worked really well together, and we just wanted to keep doing it. And then it became a true collaboration. Nowadays when we're going to work on a project, Jacoby and I are also just really close in general, so he always hears, what my ideas are and what I'm working on, even if he's not going to be the artist on it. But there are definitely times that I'm telling him a story, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know, I'll probably like do that in like a year or two or something, and he's like, yeah, I call dibs on that one, because it's something that he really wants to do. So generally, I will have some semblance of like an early concept, and then a lot of times we just talk about it, and he might throw in ideas, I might throw in ideas that he might push back on a little bit, and vice versa. But it's always a conversation. When we do work, when we do actually get to work on a book, there is a sort of delineation where I am writing the script and he is drawing the comic. But oftentimes, he's making his own choices when he's interpreting the script. So, like, he might expand something into multiple panels or even multiple pages. That happened a lot in Paco and Tiny, and also, it's the middle grade title that you mentioned that comes out in 2027. But especially in Paco and Tiny, there's so much extra bits in it, where like there's character reactions that I didn't write into the script. There's Easter eggs is really like minimizing it, but it's tough to talk about when the book isn't out yet. But I think when you eventually read that book, you'll see some of the things that I'm talking about, where none of that was in the script, and it just elevated the book in a really special way. And as far as credits go, I always just like for most of my books, whenever it is, or for all of my books, whenever I do have that control, for it to just be, by me and the co-creator, the artist. Sometimes, like with the DC book, our names are on the title, but on the interior, it does say, written by me and illustrated by Jacoby. And my book Si Se Puede is something similar. But in general, that's always just my preference for how to credit, because it is something that is created by the two of us. If I had worked on Frontera with a different artist, it would be a significantly different book, not just visually, but the story would also be different. So yeah, that's kind of the reasoning behind that.
I will say I do love those Easter egg type things now that I've read a bunch of the books, right? This land is our land. I'm like, oh, there's a Mateo and so
Yeah,
on.
yeah. And I think that was your idea, right, Jacoby?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like my fun little bit, where it's just like this is for the people that are reading and like really looking out for it. If they're gonna get all our books, have a little enjoyment with it. But yeah, just kind of adding on to that, it's just like, yeah, Julio's script I think is like the like skeleton for the story. Like it's just now like what am I going to throw on to that to make sure that like we still see this skeleton, but like it becomes something fully formed. And I think even for that first story, The Price of Freedom, this is the first time I've technically even like meeting Julio, and like it's a powerful story. And like I think I remember having a conversation with Julio and him just kind of explaining it more to me. It really gave me an insight to who Julio is, and like how his emotions are so strong and so powerful, and like the stories that we went on to tell are gonna be of that same vein. What I got from this really, other than that we get to do comics together, is like a great friendship, and that's why you don't see me working with other people, not because I don't want to work with other people. It's just because I love working with Julio, and like he gives me the respect that I try to give him. And I feel like whenever it's like, hey, can I add this? There's no like doubt that like, he's gonna be like, I actually hate that idea. Don't do that. Or like, there's gonna be like this dictating like, don't
I
do
keep
this,
this
do this.
myself. No.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's just like at this point now in our like friendship and also working relationship, it's easy, and we're already like kind of the same mind. So like there isn't going to be also like too much like friction.
He just writes too fast for
He does.
for you to
I
draw
mean,
them
that
all.
part's annoying. He needs to stop that. But yeah.
Yeah, so I want us to get into Frontera. Yeah, so one thing that I was struck by in the story is, of course, Guillermo, the ghost, serving as a historian of the border, especially regarding the Bracero program, for example, or more, very importantly, the rise of militarization, los vigilantes, and surveillance technology as well. What inspired you, or what make you take that decision or make that decision to incorporate these historical elements for your readers?
Yeah, well, I see the work that I do in all my books sort of twofold. One of them is, to tell a compelling and entertaining story, right? That the reader wants to keep turning the page and, wants to read the whole thing. But also, I think that every single book is a form of activism. It's sort of whatever the issue that we're tackling in it is, the book is sort of like my best argument, you know? So with Frontera, it is, it's about the dangers of crossing the border, and it's about trying to humanize that experience. This book came out in 2023, but we pitched it to publishers in 2020 before the pandemic. I guess we conceived of it late 2019. So, we are in the height of the first Trump administration when this is happening. Now at this point, not the height anymore, but a horrible time of dehumanization of immigrants. It's sort of the tip of the iceberg for what was to come. But even then, seeing all that made me want to tell a story that was just as human and empathetic as I could possibly tell in that moment
Mm-hmm.
about a kid, a 16-year-old kid who is crossing the border, the kind of kid that, we were being told by the government is a threat to this country, is someone that is at both times going to leech off the system and take your job, so, ultimately the goal was to tell this human story and to make it as compelling as possible. And also to educate readers, and to explain to them, A, how difficult it is to make this journey, right? So if somebody does actually make it, they've been through a lot to get there. But also to talk about just how much more dangerous it's become and the history of the border, and that it is a history of cruelty and a history of that doesn't see the humanity in the people that are trying to make this, extremely dangerous crossing. So that's sort of where it comes from.
One of my favorite scenes in the graphic novel is the encounter with Darcy, the
Yeah.
indigenous Tohono O'odham woman, which allowed us also to discuss, as you were saying, the political aspects of the border, specific, yeah, elements of the colonization of the area, and of course we have an indigenous perspective on the land. Why is the Darcy character so vital to the story?
Well, in most of the work that I do, I really like to, the setting is so important in every story. And I like to see the setting as a character of its own. So in Frontera, it's the Sonoran Desert, right? And the Sonoran Desert is this singular place, kind of like how I mentioned before, where it's this like very specific kind of desert and terrain. And if we were gonna tell a story about this place, we also had to include that indigenous perspective, right? I think it'd be dishonest to not do that. And then we also had to show the complexity of that identity, and that in the same way that there is no one immigrant perspective and there's no one Latino perspective, there is no one perspective of the people who are indigenous to the Sonoran Desert, right? And that's part of the conversation that he has with Darcy, which is that she does this great service, she's filled with empathy. She sets up these, or she's part of a team that sets up these water aid stations that help migrants and save their lives,
Mm-hmm.
like she saved Mateo's life. But she also explains that there are a lot of people in her res that are anti-immigrant and that work with the Border Patrol.
Yes.
Because that is the reality, that is the real experience of what's happening there. But yeah, for me, it was really important to make sure that we highlighted the indigenous experience there, because
Mm-hmm.
if we're going to tell this story about the history of the Sonoran Desert, it's important to show that there were people there before Mexico existed, before the United States existed. They have seen the border cross them multiple times, and yet there's still the resilience of surviving and living with dignity like she does,
Mm-hmm.
and passing it on, to people like Mateo.
So, a bit of a spoiler, people who haven't read the book, maybe fast forward a minute or two here. But I do want to talk about like maybe halfway through the book where it's revealed that Mateo's crossing is actually a return to the United States.
Hmm.
And this might be unexpected for many readers, as it's not kind of that narrative that's pushed on us about migrants coming into the US. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that decision and your thoughts on the importance of that to the narrative? And Jacoby, maybe a little bit about how you decided to illustrate that sort of mystery to the whole first part of the narrative. Like, we don't know his backstory.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so many people's experience, right? Of growing up in this country, assuming that, you're just like everybody else, right? That you're a US citizen. And a part of that, I think, comes a lot of times from not just assimilation, but the just trying to survive here, right? And the stories that we tell, our children about who they are, and yeah, with all my books, I like everything in my stories to be real, with the exception of whatever that one, genre element is, which in this case it's the Guillermo character who's a ghost. Everything is real, right? Every single incident that happens in this book is based off of real events, either from research or from people that we know or stories that have been told to us. So, like there are a lot of people that I grew up with that didn't know until they were older that they were undocumented. And I think a lot of times, it's a complicated conversation, but for a lot of them, it felt like there was anger in the moment of when they found out, but it also felt like a gift, to not have that anxiety, to not have that stress, even though it becomes like a shocking thing that's gives Mateo, a lot of complicated feelings, and he's really angry about, how his parents lied to him, but it was them trying to shield him from all the negativity and the anxiety that comes from looking over your shoulder all the time and thinking that you might be deported. So yeah, we wanted that felt integral to Mateo's character from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think I remember like early on, like that first, literally those first couple pages, we kind of set up that like this little twist happening because the first pages is like Mateo studying and like he's in the kitchen, then his parents come in, it all feels like he's just getting ready to go to school, but then,
Hmm.
we're thrown into the fact that he's actually crossing the border and like that nightmare scene that was kind of truly like showcasing like Mateo's like fear literally just like consuming him, how everything just is getting twisted for him, like nothing, just this fear and anger is just consuming him. And it's like I wanted to make sure that that emotion is portrayed because I mean Mateo literally, is now crossing the border because of this, and like his whole life is turned upside down. He has gone through like so much emotional change and like physical change as well. So I think making sure that like that was portrayed as honestly as possible, that was I think my most important role in that, and showcasing his true emotions there.
Yeah, it definitely comes across in the images, as well as in the words that are on the page for sure.
Yeah, precisely. Let's talk a little bit about emotions. Yeah, you challenge in the graphic novel. You challenge a stereotypical macho portrayals of border men by introducing a range of masculinities, including, of course, queer characters, Guillermo, and by also showing men expressing vulnerability to one another. Was this a deliberate choice?
Yeah, machismo is such a, embedded part of, I feel like I talked about how how Latino culture is not a monolith earlier, but machismo does seem to be something that has infected all of us, no matter where we're from, in Latin America, and yeah, I Guillermo being a queer character was there almost from the beginning. This is a book that originated as an idea for a short story where it was just a story about Guillermo, just a story about this ghost that is in the desert and he's stuck there. He's in limbo. And he's seen the desert change over the last 100 years and he just wants to escape it because he wants to get back to someone. And that someone very quickly became, someone that he was in love with and, another man and him being a queer character. But yeah, so all of that was deliberate. I think also, the idea that we have on one side, we have Mateo, who is this very rash sort of character who is so impatient. And you contrast that with Guillermo, who has no choice but to be patient, right?
Mhm.
It's not, was he like that 100 years ago? Maybe. Is he like that now because of everything that's happened to him 100 years ago? Maybe that's the truth. But then we contrast the two of them with these militiamen, right? And then there's a again spoiler, but There's the younger character that is
Yeah.
Mateo's age. Um, I as we talk about this now, I'm sort of realizing that that's really was like we were playing with some of the elements that would become This Land Is Our Land, our Blue Beetle book, where you have this kid that is sort of like wrapped up in something that he never wanted to be part of. Or maybe he was interested in it at some point and now he's just in over his head as part of this militia group that his uncles forced him to be part of as a way to like, quote unquote turn him into a man. There's a lot of parallels between that character and the Riley character in our Blue Beetle book. But I think for me, there's these dualities of what it is to, you know, be a man or what society tells us a man is. And in this book where we have this male protagonist at the center, who's a very flawed male protagonist, I really did want to put all these other different versions of what it is to be a man, the negative aspects of it, the positive aspects of it, which mostly, reside in Guillermo, and really just sort of have them all in conversation with each other and showcase how we can be manipulated as, young men and how that young militiaman character, if he isn't set on the right path, what he can become one day. So yeah, it's those are the parts where we're asking questions, we're answering questions, but yeah, it's all intentional.
Yeah, but there's also like an emotional depth to the conversations among men, something that it's refreshing because
Mm,
most times, yeah, we see like men behaving like signifying, yeah, or fighting with each other jokingly,
hmm.
or like maybe enjoying a drink, but here like they're really talking and they're getting into like heavy stuff together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they accept that vulnerability. Yeah, and we have Mateo's father, yeah, telling the story, accepting the story, getting into the difficult part of their migration story. But we also have the ghost, right, and all those aspects that allowed us to comprehend his story, of course, as a storytelling device. But it's also a moment in which two men are really like sharing important aspect of their lives. Yeah, so I really appreciate that from the comic.
Thanks. Thank you. I was looking over it today for the first time in a while, and I was kind of struck by like, wow, there's a lot of words on these pages. So I'm glad it was I'm glad you like that. But I was looking through it. I was like, wow, I think I've gotten a lot better at sort of cutting down on how much dialogue I put in a graphic novel.
Another thing that you mentioned, yeah, before is the spiritual aspect, right? The metaphysical aspect that is
Mhm.
part of. Although most of the things are very realistic, very like research based, at the same time that there's that element, yeah,
Mhm.
metaphysical element that I want us to talk about. The desert, in many ways, becomes a setting for profound spiritual experiences. And of course, yeah, I'm here talking about Guillermo, but also El Jefe, yeah, the Jaguar,
Mhm.
yeah, whose meaning in Aztec cosmology is deeply tied to the underworld and spiritual transformation, the passing from the realm of the living and realm of the dead. What drove you to explore these metaphysical aspects in the narrative?
Yeah, well, I am someone who has been like a big fan of David Lynch for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the surrealness of his films. I love surrealness in all forms of art, and I think that's a big part of Latin American art and literature as well. But the character of El Jefe, I came across him initially. I was reading a very small graphic novel called The Scar, and I believe it's an Italian creator, and it's about the border wall, the U.S. border wall, and the idea that the U.S. border wall is a scar, and that the comic it kind of goes into the ways that the wall defines life for people in that area. And one of the things that it highlighted was this jaguar called El Jefe, and
Mm-hmm.
how that jaguar was the majority of his species, if not all, are reside on the Mexican side of the border, but he has been seen and sighted and stuck on the U.S. side of the border, and that's something that I think I must have learned about that long before we were working on Frontera, and I kind of just like put it in my back pocket. Like I do a lot of things where I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna remember that to potentially use one day. And then as this story started developing, El Jefe felt like the perfect sort of character to show that, like, obviously there is the educational aspect of showing that there is a toll that is played on all living things when you put a border wall and you add these imaginary borders, but also the metaphysical, the spiritual angle of showing that he's just like Mateo. Mateo and El Jefe are two sides of the same coin. They are
Hmm.
both separated, and there is that the cruelty of separation, right? Because neither of them should be separated. Neither of them are separated because they've made a choice for themselves in their lives. This isn't somebody going to another country because they want to study at a school or, to whatever. These are Mateo should be with his parents and Jefe should be with, the rest of his species. So it just felt like the perfect avatar for that. But also, like you said, a desert is historically, this spiritual place for indigenous people.
Hmm.
And you sort of went into also, the lore and the role that a jaguar plays in indigenous, American culture as well. So, it's sort of like all the pieces fit where I think, in a really special way, where El Jefe is one of the characters that people talk to me a lot about when it comes to Frontera. He became, such a memorable part of the book, which, we liked him so much that we put him in the Blue Beetle graphic novel as well.
No, right on.
Yeah.
And Jacoby, when you were drawing that moment that Julio mentioned, that moment where El Jefe and Mateo kind of look into each other's eyes and see that they do share that commonality. What I really like that it's like literally in their eyes what you drew.
Yeah.
What kind of pushed you in that direction?
Well, I think it was just like such a surreal moment. So I wanted to like showcase like they literally like see each other in their eyes. Like I wanted, you know, that metaphor to be almost literal. And
Hmm.
I think it was just so cool to show Mateo like literally just understanding and like now it became like this more mystical moment that was like in such a grounded book other than, having Guillermo there the ghost, but like taking it to another level, but still almost still feeling real.
Yeah, it's like, drawing Guillermo, it's very clear he's got this ethereal look to him,
Yeah,
right? He is a ghost. He looks like a ghost, but El Jefe just is El Jefe. It's only in
yeah,
this moment where they see each other in one another's eyes where you get that sort of spiritual aspect.
yeah. And I think like also it created like now this bond between the two, whereas in the end, like, there's an understanding and in a way like Mateo's like kind of is like able to communicate to El Jefe, whereas, he did save spoiler alert, he did save like the other kid's life, the militia kid's life because of
Hmm.
this bond that was kind of set up. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just like that we created this almost mystical connection between the two.
Yeah, I love that. So I also want to talk a little bit about the color palette and the design choices for this book. I mean, from the minute I saw the cover, I was like, yep, it didn't
Yeah,
matter. Of course, your names were on it. I was going to pick it up anyway, but from that cover to like the dark flashbacks during Mateo's time at school, the red palette with the black gutters during the court hearing, and even the subtle like half toning used in telling Guillermo's backstory. Could you
mhm.
talk a little bit about the decision making process behind those choices and how they play a role in understanding the narrative?
Yeah. Well, I think like for like the whole book, it's gonna take place in the Sonoran Desert, so there's a lot of like, how do I make sure that this isn't just like sky and just brown, desert color, and like I think the Sonoran Desert is a character in itself, and as deadly as it is like extremely beautiful. Like it is so full of life, and like it's just the apparent like the it's so deadly though, and I wanted to like showcase that the desert is beautiful, like, and make sure that that was showcased and not just like it isn't like the usual like sepia tone just thrown over and it just has like this yellow hue the whole time. But like throughout like these other scenes, those color tones were intended for storytelling purposes, with the black cutters, and like I wanted to show like this is not a fun moment for Mateo. He is going through it, and I'm trying to think what else. Like, oh yeah, like the history aspect of it with like Guillermo going through like his life and all that. Those were just told because like I think there was like a pinkish hue over the Guillermo backstory because like that was a time in his life where it was like a romantic looking. Julio's looking at it right now. Is it pinkish or
I don't see the pink.
okay, whatever.
But well,
But
in the
like
kissing scene, there's I'd say purple.
But
okay,
it's got that
then
half toning kind of, it makes it
yeah,
like was used
yeah,
in like old comic style, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And like it, other than just as a visual key to note that it's like a back, but like there is an intended hue. I just can't remember which hue it was. To like because of the romance aspect of it and like almost nostalgia for Guillermo, looking back on this like precious memory. Whereas like for like when he took Mateo back through history of the border, it gets towards the end it gets redder and redder because like the border itself is getting more militarized and more brutal and violent. And I think it is all like based on emotion. Like sometimes is it grounded within the story? No, but like the emotion aspect is going to carry the color throughout.
Okay.
And I wanted to make sure that like that is visually conveyed for the reader.
Well, I think that was a success, right? Because I mean, I taught this book in my class, and that was some of the things they really picked up on, were the color palettes and the different hues for different like emotional moments. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
and actually I think I remember when you first showed it, like one of the readers' comments was about how like after Darcy, Mateo took off his blue jacket and like had his red shirt shown, and I think that was like it wasn't initially intended, but when I like was like, oh wait, this is like him like truly like taking off this like almost
Opening up.
depression,
Yeah.
yeah, like literally depression, and like this blue jacket, is coming off and like showing off the red and like the fiery spirit in him. I think like he just was re-energized after Darcy and like
Hmm.
kind of came to terms with the situation that he's in and like the perseverance for him to like finish it.
I love that. Yeah. And I remember sending that one to you and you just feel like,
Yeah,
I'm so glad someone noticed
yeah,
that. And speaking of teaching the book, I know there's a teaching guide for Frontera that's freely available and kind of created with maybe middle school and high school students in mind. What, if any, role did you all have in creating that guide, or what do you hope that younger readers of the book learn from it?
Our role was bullying the publisher to do
yeah,
it.
Fully
Um,
support.
yeah, and also, telling them who to use. Home, my first comic series, I was sort of cold DM'd by this group called Reimagining Migration after the book was announced and asked if they could do, they offered to do a free educator guide for it. And that was my first real exposure to what an educator guide is, and then my first exposure to the power of it because it's now something that I encourage is the nice way. Every publisher that I work with to make one for my books, and every single one has to date, because it is so useful for teachers. It's so useful for getting the books in the classroom, which is where I want them to be. That's a whole new audience that's opened up. So then when it came time for Frontera, it just felt like such Home had been out for 2 years already, and I had seen the impact that the educator guide had on getting that book into classes. So it just was such an obvious move. And then I also, after I finally convinced them to do it, I had a beer who she used to work at Reimagining Migration. She was the writer of the Educator Guide for Home. I brought her in to make the Educator Guide for Frontera. So that was really our role. Instead of bullying, I can say cheerleading the publisher to do it. But yeah, so it's super important to me and for all my books.
And have you ever received any feedback from teachers or students who've used it in their classes?
Yeah, all the time, all the time. At conventions, I'll have, especially at New York Comic Con, where there is so many librarians and educators, so many people come up to the table, talk to me about how they read it in class or they taught it in class and use the educator guide. But it's also for me always like something that I'm always bringing up, you know. At my tables at conventions, I give away these bookmarks that have a QR code on the back that lead you directly to the educator guides, which I just, you know, they're all free, you know, they're as easily available as possible. So yeah, it's been nothing but great feedback about those.
Before we wrap up, just wanted to take a moment to thank you both for taking the time to speak with us.
Gracias. Yes.
And if you wanted to, mention one more time your upcoming projects together and also where people can find your information or follow you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Before I talk about the books that we have upcoming, I'd encourage anyone who's listening to this and who read Frontera or enjoyed it to go get our next book after this one. This Land is Our Land, Blue Beetle story. It is a graphic novel starring Blue Beetle, the DC Comics character. But more than that, it is a very grounded coming of age story with superhero elements in it. But, you know, it explores a different side of the conversation that we had in Frontera, which is the villainization of immigrants, the politicization of immigrants in the U.S., and the hate that can inspire, and the way that might radicalize a young man, and also written in a way that's compassionate towards him also, and shows how somebody who has gotten wrapped up in white nationalism and all these racist fringe elements that exist today within young men, and how you can get out of that, all wrapped up in a superhero story. So I'd encourage anyone who's listening to check that out first, but then also the next project that we have hasn't been announced yet, but it will be a single issue miniseries that'll come out from Boom Comics next fall, so probably a year from now. After that, we have Paco and Tiny that'll come out in early 2027. That's our middle grade graphic novel. Very different vibe from Frontera. It's a lot more fun and optimistic, but still tackling, an immigrant experience, but in a very different way, in a very different tone. And then after that, we'll have our next YA graphic novel, which is called Prison Kids. You mentioned it earlier. And that one, I guess, is technically the proper follow-up to Frontera because it is the first time that we'll be back with a YA graphic novel that is not related to a pre-existing character. It's a brand new original idea.
It's all original.
Yep. And yeah, so we're really excited for that. From our 5-issue miniseries to Paco and Tiny to Prison Kids, I think one of the really special things is that you'll see Jacoby use 3 very distinct styles that really just like show, the diversity of his style, but also, how great of an artist he is. So I'm really excited for everyone to read all those.
Thank you. I mean, I think he's got it covered, yeah.
So we will share any information in our show notes with where people can find your work. And yes, definitely go check out all the books that are available now and any of the books that are upcoming. And it was great talking with you both. We'll
thanks for having us.
So great talking with you guys.
See you at Comic-Con again next year.
Yeah.
Great chatting with you guys. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks. So, Rojo, what did you think about that conversation we just had?
Yeah, it was inspiring to reflect with them on how writing for a graphic novel is a layered process, one that moves between moments of individual creation, such as the one that Anta describes, and deep collaboration between the two of them. From the initial stages of brainstorming to the ways scenes are expanded and transformed through the visual mediums, their process exemplified the dynamic interplay between text and image.
Yeah.
I was also struck by the decolonial politics of representation they practice. And what I mean by that is how they include indigenous characters, queer storytelling, relationships that extend beyond the human. And I'm talking here about El Jefe, the
El
Jaguar. Yes,
Jefe.
and an interconnected critique, of course, of white supremacy and patriarchal structures.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was looking up something on Goodreads and, some people were saying, oh, they covered too much. And I'm like, I think it wouldn't have been the same story, of course, if they hadn't told all of those things. But I think it's important to tell all of those things in conversation with one another because none of them exist in a vacuum. And so having that interplay, as you mentioned, is really important.
Yeah, and as we were talking about with them, it is essential that border stories are discussed with nuances, with historical background, with sociological context, and they're bringing all of that into the story. So I really appreciate that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, for me, like as I mentioned at the top of the episode, I taught the book in my class a couple of years ago, and I'd actually invited Julio and Jacoby to come speak to my students. Jacoby lives on the West Coast, so he wasn't able to make it. Julio did come in, though, and speak with my students. And I thought, it was really great at the time to hear his perspective and his answers to the students' questions. But I felt like this conversation painted a fuller picture of the creation of the book because we're able to speak with both of them. And as you talked about, that sort of relationship that they have with one another as a creative team. I particularly appreciated hearing about that collaborative process, but also how important the subject matter was to both of them. This isn't just a book that they were writing. This is really something that is important to both of them.
Yeah, it was great to hear about the process at large, not only for Frontera. But let's talk a little bit about Frontera. Yeah, what are your thoughts on the book?
I mean, I immediately loved Frontera when I first read it. Like I said, some people might consider graphic novels, light or easy reads, and clearly they haven't read some of the really heavy graphic novels there are out there. But, I found that this one tackled some of those complex border issues in a way that was accessible, but not really light at all. There's a lot of serious things from the very beginning, the separation of Mateo and his parents, immediately that's a heavy topic. They fit a lot into the book, and my understanding from earlier conversations with them is that there was a lot more that they wanted to say and to include in the book, but Harper was like, yeah, this is your page limit. This is what you've got to work with. And the one thing I really appreciate, and I know I mentioned this in the interview, was the spin on Mateo's story. It was something that we don't typically hear in migrant border crossing stories. There's something a little bit different about his experience that, if you were listening through, you heard what we were talking about. But if you fast forwarded, you'll find out when you read the book. And I think, again, that goes back to what you were talking about. The nuance is really important.
Yeah. I'm really thankful that you recommended this book to me. Yeah, it was like a really great read. Yeah, and I feel like Fronteras, what it does really well is balancing the individual and the collective. They created Anta and Salcedo together, right? Created a narrative that is historically grounded, yeah, but also very intimate in many ways. Yeah, the graphic novel demonstrates an awareness of the broader history of the U.S.-Mexico border, and we have the how they reference immigration policies or labor programs such as the Bracero program, and that situates the story within a continuum of displacement, of exploitation, but also of survival and resilience. But Frontera never loses sight of the personal either, right?
Right.
Through its portrayal of individual experiences, that of Mateo, that of Guillermo, that of all the other characters, it captures the emotional complexity of migration. That could be the fear, the hope, of arrival, the loss, the feeling of separation, but also the courage, la valentía that goes with every crossing.
Yeah, I mean, and even as you were mentioning before, beyond the human in that, right? Because we talk about El Jefe, but, and all of the different people that Mateo encounters along the way, whether it is Guillermo or whether it's, someone trying to provide him with water, someone trying to arrest him or trap him, right? There's all of these different elements come together, and courage, I think the word you mentioned there, is really what's key in this story.
Yeah, also, for example, with a character like Darcy, we have a perspective on the border as something that is not natural, that it is created, that is based on geopolitics, that is based on a very complex stories that might take us back to the 19th century and even before that, right? So that helps us contextualize the border as not something fixed, but something that is always evolving as well.
Yeah, yeah. And it does it so cleanly, right? In terms of, it's not saying pause, let's talk about this thing. Even though that moment with Darcy it's sort of like a side quest in a sense, it weaves it into the rest of the greater narrative really smoothly.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
So this season we were talking about borders. What are your thoughts on our season overall, covering the 3 different episodes?
Yeah, so what stand out most from this season on the border is that no two migration journeys are the same, even as they are shaped by shared historical and structural forces, as we have seen with all the examples we have covered. These sources that we look at, from the documentary Who is Dayani Cristal, to the children books, the one by Dante Cat, the one by Yuji Morales, to now Frontera, the graphic novel, all of them invite audiences and readers to see migration as a constellation of experiences connected by systemic conditions, by violence, but also by collective memory. And in doing so, these different works becomes platform to engage testimony, but also political commentary.
Yeah.
And this perspective reminds me that behind every statistic or policy lies a deeply personal story of survival and a search for human rights.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that because, in my intro to Latin American Studies class, I have a unit where we talk about migration, and we read a border crossing story about a young woman who, has to hide in the luggage section of the bus, surrounded by odors that would kind of deter the police dogs and such. So she has to hide there so that she's not caught by the border patrol. But I paired that story with a news video about the causes of high migration to the US border from Central American countries, and particularly the role that the United States plays in the waves of migration that we do see at the border, right? Because it goes back decades, centuries even, honestly. And students really appreciate pairing that news story with the statistics and the data-driven information with the personal narrative of a young girl who truly in her real life experienced crossing that border, right? It's that pairing of the two that really completes the story. I think this connects back to what you're saying about these are human beings. They're not numbers. They're not statistics. There's a lot more nuance to the story. And when it comes to border stories, these are for people of all ages, audiences, young and old. I mean, you mentioned a moment ago, we covered picture books, we covered this young adult graphic novel, we covered the documentary film that might appeal more to adult audiences. But it's very clear that border stories are meant for everyone to learn about and from. And that it's because every story is unique that we need to keep telling them.
Yeah, and as we saw, for example, with Yuyi Morales and with a character like El Jefe in Frontera, is that border stories are also about ecology, or it's about how we care about the planet and how we protect the planet, and how borders are also very destructive to the environment, and how this creation that comes from geopolitics is also transforming our planet in so many ways, many of them in very destructive
Very
ways.
destructive, yeah. And even tying it back to the documentary film, when they're traveling on La Bestia, just that journey through those ecologies, through the different environments, and the disruption that like something like that train can cause from the southern to the northern parts of Mexico.
And definitely the wall, right? And we see like both Yuyi Morales and Anta and Salcedo are talking about the wall as a structure, as an architecture of division, a division of family, but also a division between species that are supposed to be together.
Right.
Yeah, and how that division, that manufactured division, is also transforming the natural flow and cycles of life within that region.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. If you have anything to add to the conversation, remember that you can always reach out to us on social media or by email.
Follow the podcast on Instagram and Blue Sky at Latinx Visions. Our email address is latinxvisions@gmail.com. If you have any thoughts, we'd love to share them in a future episode.
Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Share us with your friends and family, and be sure to leave a 5-star review to help others find the show.
Well, that's a wrap for season 9 of the podcast, but make sure that you are subscribed so that you're here when we begin season 10 next year.
Estamos a la escucha, mi gente.
Dale, until next season.